The auction block stood in the merciless Texas sun, and Thomas Owens felt every eye in Fort Davis burning into his skin as the auctioneer called out numbers that reduced 17 years of his life to cold silver dollars. He had signed the papers himself 3 days ago, desperate and hollow with grief, selling 7 years of his labor to pay the debts his father had left behind after dying in a mining accident outside town. And now here he stood while men bid on his future like he was livestock at market. $40 for 7 years, called out a rancher with a tobacco-stained beard. 50, countered another, a mine owner whose cruelty was legendary throughout West Texas. Thomas kept his gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the crowd, on the Davis Mountains rising purple and ancient in the distance, and tried not to think about how his father had always promised him they would work their own land someday, raise their own cattle, be beholden to no man. That dream had died in the rubble of a collapsed mine shaft, and Thomas had spent the last 3 months watching everything they owned get sold piece by piece to cover debts he had not even known existed. When the final bill came due and he had nothing left, not even the shack they had called home, he had made the choice that felt like no choice at all. $75, said a new voice, clear and firm. Thomas could not help but look then, and he saw her for the first time. She stood apart from the cluster of rough men, a woman in her early 20s with dark honey hair pulled back beneath a wide-brimmed hat, wearing riding clothes that spoke of practical work rather than parlor sitting. Her face was sun-touched and serious, her jaw set with determination that made several of the men turn and stare. "Miss Ramsey," the auctioneer said, surprise evident in his tone, "you are aware this is a labor contract for 7 years." "I can count, Mr. Peterson," she replied, her voice carrying across the square. $80. The mine owner scowled. 85, and begging your pardon, miss, but what does a young woman need with an indentured man? That is my concern, not yours, she said coolly. $90. Thomas watched this exchange with a mixture of confusion and something else he could not quite name. The woman met his eyes briefly, and he saw no cruelty there, no calculating assessment of his worth as labor. What he saw was something almost like recognition, as though she understood exactly what this moment was costing him. $100, the mine owner spat, his face reddening. $125, she said without hesitation. A murmur went through the crowd. That was more money than most men in Fort Davis saw in 6 months. The mine owner opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly unwilling to pay such a sum. The auctioneer waited, called once, twice, 3 times, and then brought his gavel down with a crack that sounded like a prison door closing. Sold to Miss Lily Ramsey for $125. Thomas felt his knees weaken but forced himself to stand straight as Lily Ramsey approached the platform. She was tall for a woman, perhaps 5.5 feet, and she moved with the easy confidence of someone who spent more time on horseback than in drawing rooms. Up close, he could see that her eyes were gray-green like sage, and they studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "Can you ride?" she asked without preamble. "Yes, madam. Handle cattle, some. My father and I worked a small ranch before we lost it." She nodded as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. "I have a ranch 15 miles west of here, up in the foothills. It is hard work, but I treat my people fairly. You will have your own quarters, 3 meals a day and Sundays off unless there is an emergency. Do you drink to excess?" "No, madam." "Good. Do you have any belongings to collect?" Thomas almost laughed at that. "No, madam." "What you see is what I have." Something flickered in her eyes then, something that might have been sympathy or understanding or both. "Then we will leave as soon as I have settled the paperwork. Wait by the horses." She gestured to where two mounts stood tied to the hitching post. One a sturdy bay gelding and the other a gray mare with intelligent eyes. The next hour passed in a blur of signatures and paperwork, and curious stares from townspeople who clearly wondered what Lily Ramsey was thinking, buying a man's labor contract when everyone knew she barely scraped by on that ranch of hers. Thomas learned fragments of information from their whispered comments. Her father had died 2 years ago. She had no brothers. She was trying to run a cattle operation with only 2 aging ranch hands and sheer stubbornness. Most people expected her to fail and sell out within another year. When Lily finally emerged from the land office, she had a rolled bundle under one arm which she handed to Thomas. "A bedroll and some supplies," she said. "You will need them tonight." They rode out of Fort Davis in silence, heading west into country that grew wilder with each mile. The land here was beautiful in a harsh way, all scrub and stone and sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. The Davis Mountains rose ahead of them, not as tall as the Rockies but ancient and weathered, holding secrets in their canyons and draws. After an hour, Thomas finally found his voice. "Why did you do that? By my contract, I mean. You paid more than twice what anyone else was willing." Lily did not answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the trail ahead. When she spoke, her words were measured. "Because I know what it is like to be at the mercy of men who see you as something to be used. Because I needed help, and you needed someone who would not work you to death in a mine shaft. Because the look on your face when you stood on that platform reminded me of how I felt at my father's funeral, when every rancher in 3 counties came sniffing around, offering to marry me and take the ranch off my hands, as though I was property to be transferred with the deed." Thomas absorbed this, studying her profile as she rode. "So this is about fairness. This is about survival," she said bluntly. "Mine and yours. I cannot run the ranch alone, and you needed a situation that would not break you. I saw the other bidders. I know what kind of men they are. This seemed like the better option for both of us." "I am still your property for 7 years," Thomas said, and he could not keep the bitterness entirely from his voice. She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and her expression was serious. "No, you are a man working off a debt. There is a difference, even if the law does not always recognize it. I will not treat you like property, Thomas Owens. I will treat you like a hired hand who cannot leave until his term is served. Can you live with that distinction?" He thought about it, about the mine owner's cruel eyes and the rancher's calculating assessment, about the shack he had lost and the father who had died trying to provide for them. "Yes, madam, I can live with that. Then call me Lily when we are away from town. Madam makes me feel like my grandmother." Despite everything, Thomas felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Yes, Lily." They reached the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. The ranch itself was modest, a main house built of adobe with a wooden porch, a barn that had seen better days, a bunkhouse, and several corrals. Thomas could see cattle scattered across the valley beyond, maybe 200 head, which was a decent number if they were healthy. 2 men emerged from the barn as they rode up, both weathered and lean with age. Lily introduced them as Henry and Samuel, brothers who had worked for her father and stayed on after his death. They regarded Thomas with cautious curiosity but no hostility, which was more than he had expected. "He is here to help with the herd work," Lily said simply. "Thomas Owens, this is Henry and Samuel Mitchell." Henry, the older of the two, nodded slowly. "We can use the help. Been trying to convince Miss Lily she needs more hands, but she is stubborn about the money." "Because we barely have money for supplies," Lily said, swinging down from her horse with practiced ease. "Thomas, you will bunk with Henry and Samuel. They will show you the routine." We rise before dawn, work until dark, and we do not waste daylight talking about things that need doing instead of doing them. Over the next weeks, Thomas learned the rhythm of the ranch. Lily had not exaggerated about the work being hard. They were up every morning while stars still blazed overhead, checking cattle, mending fences, breaking horses, hauling water, and 1,000 other tasks that never seemed to end. But Lily had not lied about the treatment either. She worked alongside them from dawn until dusk, never asking them to do anything she would not do herself. Thomas watched her rope and brand cattle with the skill of any cowhand, watched her gentle a half-wild Mustang with patience and soft words, watched her calculate figures in the ranch ledger by lamplight with lines of worry creasing her forehead. She was nothing like he had expected. In town, women were either married or working in saloons or running boarding houses, their lives circumscribed by rigid expectations. But Lily Ramsey seemed to exist outside those boundaries, carving out space for herself through sheer determination. She could shoot as well as any man, ride better than most, and run the ranch with a sharp mind for business even if money was always tight. Thomas found himself watching her more than he should, noticing things that had nothing to do with ranch work. The way she tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The rare smile that transformed her serious face when one of the horses did something clever. The way she sat on the porch in the evening with a cup of coffee, staring out at the mountains as though they held answers to questions she had not yet learned to ask. One night, about 6 weeks after his arrival, Thomas sat with Henry and Samuel in the bunkhouse, playing cards by lantern light. Henry was telling a story about Lily's father, about how he had come to Texas with nothing but a dream and built the ranch from scratch over 20 years. "He was a good man, John Ramsey," Henry said, laying down a card. "Fair and honest, which is more than you can say for most. When he died, every vulture in 3 counties descended trying to get the ranch. But Miss Lily, she dug in her heels, told them all to go straight to hell, begging your pardon for the language." "Why did they want it so bad?" Thomas asked. Samuel spoke up then, his voice gravelly from years of breathing dust. "Water rights. This valley has springs that flow year-round, even in drought. Control this land, you control access to water for miles around. Some powerful men want that control." "Like who?" "Marcus Sloan, mainly," Henry said, his expression darkening. "Owns the biggest ranch in the county, over near Alpine. Been trying to buy out or squeeze out every small rancher between here and there. He made Miss Lily several offers, each one with more teeth than the last. Latest one came with a proposal of marriage." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Did she consider it?" Henry snorted. "Threw him off the property. Sloan is near 45 and mean as a snake. He does not want a wife, he wants the land and a woman to warm his bed." Miss Lily saw right through him. "He will not give up," Samuel added quietly. "Men like that never do." The words stayed with Thomas through the following days. He found himself paying more attention to riders he saw on the horizon, to strangers in town when they went for supplies. He started to understand the weight Lily carried, the constant pressure of trying to hold on to something everyone else wanted to take. It was midsummer when the first real trouble came. Thomas was working in the north pasture with Lily stringing new wire for a fence line, when they saw dust rising from the valley below. 5 riders were moving through the herd, and even from a distance, Thomas could see they were deliberately scattering the cattle. "Sloan's men," Lily said, her voice tight with fury. She was already running for her horse. "Wait," Thomas called, but she was not waiting. He swung onto his own mount and followed, his heart hammering. He had heard enough stories about range wars to know how this could end. They reached the riders as they were driving a dozen head toward the property line. The man in front was big and broad-shouldered, with a scar running down one cheek. He grinned when he saw Lily bearing down on them. "Afternoon, Miss Ramsey," he called out with mock politeness. "We were just helping you gather your strays. Seems like some of your cattle wandered onto Mr. Sloane's land." "Those cattle are nowhere near Sloane's land, and you know it, Garrett," Lily said, pulling her horse to a stop. Thomas noticed her hand resting near the rifle in her saddle scabbard. "Turn them back now." "Now, is that any way to talk to someone trying to be neighborly?" Garrett's grin widened. "Mr. Sloane sent me to deliver another message. His offer still stands. $1,000 for the ranch, and he will even let you stay on as housekeeper. Get off my land." "You cannot hold this place alone, little girl. One woman and two old men, and now this boy." Garrett's eyes flicked to Thomas with contempt. "Sloane will have this valley one way or another. You can take his offer and walk away with money, or you can lose everything." Thomas saw Lily's jaw tighten, saw her hand move toward the rifle. Before she could do something that would get them both killed, he moved his horse forward, placing himself between Lily and Garrett. "The lady asked you to leave," Thomas said, keeping his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "You should probably do that," Garrett laughed. "Or what? You are some indentured boy trying to play cowboy. Get out of the way before you get hurt." "Thomas," Lily said behind him, a warning in her voice. But Thomas had spent too many years watching his father stand up to bullies, had learned that sometimes you had to draw a line even when you were scared. 5 against 2 is not much for odds, but you start something here, people will know. Every rancher in the county will hear how Marcus Sloane sent 5 men to threaten a woman on her own land. That will not sit well, even with the ones who want her gone. Garrett's smile faded. "You are making a mistake, boy. Maybe. But we are not moving, and those cattle are not leaving this property." For a long moment, nobody moved. Thomas could feel his hands sweating, could hear his own heartbeat loud in his ears. Then Garrett spat into the dust and turned his horse. "This is not over," he said. "Sloane does not forget." They rode off, leaving the scattered cattle behind. Thomas watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then finally allowed himself to breathe. When he turned, Lily was staring at him with an expression he could not read. "That was either very brave or very foolish," she said. "Probably both." She almost smiled at that. "Thank you. Most men would have let me handle it alone or worse, agreed with them." "You bought my contract to keep me out of the mines," Thomas said. "Least I can do is keep Sloane's men from running off your cattle." They worked in silence for a while, gathering the scattered cattle and driving them back toward the main herd. The sun was high overhead and sweat ran down Thomas's back beneath his shirt. Finally, Lily spoke again. "I should tell you something. Sloane is not going to stop. He will keep pushing until something breaks. You signed on for ranch work, not a range war. If you want to leave, I will tear up the contract." Thomas looked at her, at this woman who faced down men twice her size with nothing but determination and pride, who worked herself to exhaustion every day trying to hold onto her father's dream. He thought about the auction block, about being sold like property, about how she had paid more than she could afford to give him a better option. "I am not leaving," he said. "Thomas. I mean it. You gave me my dignity back when you could have let those other men buy me cheap. I am not walking away because some bully wants your land." She held his gaze for a long moment, and Thomas saw something shift in her expression, some wall coming down. "You might regret that decision. I have already made enough decisions I regret. This will not be one of them." They rode back to the ranch house together as the sun began its descent. That evening, after supper, Lily called all 3 men to the porch. She laid out the situation plainly: Sloane's increasing pressure, the harassment from his men, the probability that things would escalate. "I cannot ask you to fight my battles," she said, looking at each of them in turn. "Henry, Samuel, you have already given years to this ranch. Thomas, you are here because of circumstances beyond your control. If any of you want to leave, I understand." Henry leaned back in his chair, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Miss Lily, your father was the best man I ever worked for. He gave me and Samuel a home when we had nothing. I will be damned if I let some land-grabbing bastard run us off now." "What Henry said," Samuel added quietly. They all looked at Thomas. He met Lily's eyes and saw something there that made his chest tighten. "I already told you my answer." "Then I guess we are in this together," Lily said, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked genuinely relieved. "I will ride to town tomorrow and talk to the sheriff. Let him know what happened. Probably will not do any good, but at least it will be on record." Over the following weeks, Sloane's pressure increased. They found fences cut, cattle scattered, water sources fouled. Once, someone took shots at Henry and Samuel while they were riding the south boundary, though whether it was meant to kill or just frighten was unclear. Lily reported each incident to the sheriff, but everyone knew the law was useless against a man as powerful as Marcus Sloane. Through it all, Thomas found himself growing closer to Lily in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. They worked side by side every day, and he learned to read her moods, to know when she needed space and when she needed someone to talk to. Some evenings, she would sit on the porch after supper, and he would join her, and they would talk about everything and nothing about her father's dreams for the ranch, about Thomas's childhood before his own father died, about the strange circumstances that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Lily asked one night, her voice soft in the darkness. "Signing the contract, I mean, selling yourself to pay your father's debts." Thomas thought about it. A few months ago, his answer would have been immediate and bitter. But now, sitting beside Lily with the night wind carrying the scent of sage and the stars blazing overhead, he found his feelings more complicated. "I regret the circumstances that made it necessary," he said slowly. "I regret that my father died with debts I did not know about, regret that I did not have any other options. But I do not regret where I ended up. You have been fair to me, Lily, more than fair." "Still," she said, 7 years is a long time to not be free." "Freedom is a strange thing," Thomas said. "On paper, I belong to you for 7 years, but I feel more free here than I did before when I was scrambling to survive day by day with no future in sight. At least here I know where I stand, what I am working toward." Lily turned to look at him, and in the lamplight spilling from the window, her eyes were luminous. "What are you working toward?" He should have said something about paying off his debt, about earning his freedom back. But sitting there with Lily close enough to touch, Thomas found himself wanting to say something else entirely, something about building a future and finding a home and falling in love with a woman who was too stubborn to give up on her dreams. Instead, he said, "Helping you keep this ranch." "Why?" She asked it genuinely, not challenging but curious. "It is not your ranch. In 7 years you will be free to go anywhere, do anything." "In 7 years a lot could change," Thomas said carefully. "Like what?" He met her eyes. "I do not know yet, but I am willing to find out." Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but understood. Lily looked away first, but Thomas saw the faint color in her cheeks, saw the way her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "I should check the horses," she said, standing abruptly. "Lily, wait." She paused, her back to him. "I know I am in no position to say this," Thomas said, the words coming from somewhere deep and honest. "I know I am an indentured man with nothing to my name but the clothes on my back. But working here with you, it has shown me what kind of person I want to be." And I think you are remarkable." Lily stood very still for a long moment. Then, without turning around, she said softly, "You are remarkable too, Thomas Owens, which is exactly why this is complicated." She walked away toward the barn, leaving Thomas alone on the porch with his heart pounding and his mind racing. He knew she was right. The power imbalance between them was impossible to ignore. She owned his contract, controlled his future. Anything that developed between them would be shadowed by that reality. But knowing something was complicated did not make the feelings go away. The next morning, Thomas was checking the fence line near the eastern boundary when he saw a rider approaching. He tensed, hand moving toward the rifle, but relaxed when he recognized the figure. It was Lily, and she was moving fast. "We have trouble," she said as soon as she was in earshot. "Henry just rode in from town." "Sloan filed papers with the land office claiming we defaulted on a loan my father took out before he died. He is demanding immediate payment of $500 or he gets the ranch." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "Did your father owe him money?" "I do not know," Lily said, and Thomas heard the fear beneath her anger. "Papa handled all the business. After he died, I went through his papers and paid off everything I could find. But if he took a loan from Sloan privately, there might not have been any paperwork, just a handshake agreement." "Can Sloan prove there was a loan?" "He has a promissory note with my father's signature. I will not know if it is real until I see it, but the land office is treating it as legitimate." "How long do you have?" 30 days. Thomas did quick calculations. $500 was more money than the ranch would generate in a year, even if they sold half the herd. And doing that would destroy their future prospects. "There has to be a way," he said. "If there is, I have not found it." Lily's voice was hollow. "I have been going through Papa's papers all morning. Nothing. No record of any loan from Sloan." "Maybe because there was not one," Thomas said. "Maybe he forged the note." "Maybe, but how do I prove that? It is his word against mine, and he has money and influence." They rode back to the ranch house in grim silence. Henry and Samuel were waiting on the porch, their faces reflecting the same worry Thomas felt. "What are we going to do?" Henry asked. Lily dismounted slowly, her movements heavy with exhaustion. "I am going to town tomorrow to look at the note myself. If it is a forgery, maybe I can find something wrong with it, some way to challenge it." "And if you cannot?" Samuel asked quietly. "Then I have 30 days to come up with $500 or lose everything my father built." That night, Thomas could not sleep. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to Henry's snoring and thinking about Lily losing the ranch, about Sloan's victory, about injustice wearing the mask of law. He thought about the auction block, about being sold for coin, about what it meant to be powerless. Somewhere near midnight, he made a decision. The next morning, Thomas approached Lily before she left for town. "I am going with you." She looked at him with exhausted eyes. "You do not need to." "Yes, I do." They rode to Fort Davis together through country that shimmered with heat. Thomas had been thinking all morning about what he could do, about resources he might have forgotten. Then it hit him. "The contract," he said suddenly. Lily glanced at him. "What about it?" "You paid $125 for it. What if you sold it?" She pulled her horse to a stop. "Thomas, no. Listen. If you sold the contract to someone else, you would get most of that money back. Maybe not all of it, but enough to make a difference. Combined with selling some cattle and anything else you can scrape together, it might be enough." "Absolutely not," Lily said flatly. "I bought your contract to get you away from men who would have worked you to death. I am not going to turn around and sell you to someone else just to save the ranch." "But if it would save the ranch—" "No, Thomas." Her voice was sharp now. "The ranch is land and cattle and buildings. You are a human being. I will not trade one for the other." even if it means losing everything. Even then, she said, and the fierceness in her voice made something in Thomas's chest ache. I would rather lose the ranch than lose my soul. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Thomas said quietly, "Why?" "Because you matter," Lily said simply. "Because some things are worth more than land and water rights. Because I have already lost my father, and I will be damned if I lose my integrity too." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Thomas wanted to say something about how much that meant to him, how nobody had ever chosen him over practical necessity before. But before he could find the words, Lily urged her horse forward. "Come on. We are wasting daylight." At the land office in Fort Davis, they examined the promissory note Sloan had filed. It was dated 3 years earlier and bore what appeared to be John Ramsey's signature, promising to repay $500 with interest within 3 years or forfeit the ranch as collateral. Lily studied it with a desperate intensity, looking for anything that seemed wrong. But the signature looked right, the paper was aged appropriately, and the language was exactly what such a document would contain. "I want to see a lawyer," Lily said finally. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, shook his head. "You are welcome to consult one, Miss Ramsey, but the note appears legitimate. Unless you can prove it is a forgery or provide evidence that the debt has been paid, the claim will stand." Outside, in the brutal Texas sunshine, Lily leaned against the hitching post with her eyes closed. Thomas saw her hands shaking. "Hey," he said softly, "we will find a way." "How?" "That signature looked exactly like Papa's. Even if it is a forgery, it is a perfect one." "Then we get the money somehow." "In 30 days. Thomas, be realistic." He was about to respond when a voice interrupted them. "Miss Ramsey." They turned to find an older woman approaching, dressed in respectable clothing with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Thomas recognized her vaguely as someone he had seen around town but whose name he did not know. "Mrs. Patterson," Lily said, straightening up. "How are you?" "Well enough, child, but I heard about your trouble just now from my husband at the land office." "He works there as a clerk," she added for Thomas's benefit. "May I speak with you privately?" Lily glanced at Thomas, who nodded and stepped away. He watched the two women talk, saw Mrs. Patterson pull something from her handbag and show it to Lily, saw Lily's expression shift from despair to hope to something like shock. The conversation lasted perhaps 10 minutes, and when Lily returned to him, her face was unreadable. "What did she say?" Thomas asked. "Get the horses. I need to see someone." They rode to a small house on the edge of town, where an elderly man answered Lily's knock. She spoke with him briefly on the porch, and Thomas saw him nod and disappear inside, returning with a dusty ledger. He opened it to a specific page and pointed to an entry. Lily read it, thanked him profusely, and practically ran back to the horses. "Thomas," she said, and her voice was shaking with something between laughter and tears. Mrs. Patterson remembered something. 3 years ago, shortly after Papa supposedly took out this loan, he made a large payment to Marcus Sloan. $550, paid in full according to Sloan's own ranch foreman, who Mrs. Patterson's husband witnessed recording it in their books. That man still lives in town, and he just confirmed it. Papa paid the loan back immediately, probably with money from selling some breeding stock. The debt was settled 3 years ago. Thomas felt hope surge through him. "So Sloan is lying." "Sloan is lying," Lily confirmed, "and I can prove it." They returned to the land office, where Lily presented her evidence to the clerk. The old foreman came with them, swearing that he had personally recorded the payment in Sloan's ranch ledger and witnessed Sloan mark the debt as satisfied. "I do not work for him anymore," the foreman explained. "He let me go last year when I got too old for the work." but I remember that payment clear as day because it was unusual for Miss Lily's father to borrow money at all, and even more unusual for him to pay it back so fast. The clerk examined the foreman's testimony, made notes, and finally looked up at Lily. "This changes things. If Mr. Sloane received payment and failed to return the note or mark it satisfied, then his current claim is fraudulent. I will need to investigate further, but your ranch is not in immediate jeopardy." "How long will the investigation take?" Lily asked. "A few weeks at minimum, but in the meantime, Sloane cannot touch your property." Outside, Lily let out a breath that seemed to contain all the tension of the past day. "I cannot believe it. I thought I had lost everything." "You fought for it," Thomas said, "and you won." She turned to him, and her smile was brilliant in the Texas sun. "We won. If you had not come with me today, I might have given up." "You would never have given up," Thomas said with certainty. "You do not know how." They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. For the first time in weeks, the weight of fear had lifted, and Thomas found himself acutely aware of everything: the sound of hoofbeats on the dusty trail, the warmth of the fading day, the way Lily's profile looked against the backdrop of mountains. When they reached the ranch, they told Henry and Samuel the news. There was a celebration of sorts that evening, with Samuel breaking out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving, and Henry playing a battered harmonica. Even Lily, who rarely showed any lightness, laughed and seemed years younger than her constant worry usually made her appear. Later, after Henry and Samuel had retired to the bunkhouse, Thomas found Lily on the porch again, looking out at the stars. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said when he joined her. "When I thought I was going to lose the ranch, my first thought was not about the land or the cattle or even my father's memory. It was about you and Henry and Samuel, about what would happen to you all if Sloane took over." "We would have figured something out," Thomas said. "Maybe. But I realized something today. This ranch has never just been about the land. It is about having a place to belong, people to belong with. Papa understood that. It is why he hired Henry and Samuel when other ranchers called them too old. It is why She trailed off. "Why you what?" She turned to face him, and in the starlight her eyes were dark and serious. "Why I paid too much for an indentured man at an auction. I told myself it was about fairness and needing help, but that was not the whole truth. When I saw you standing there, looking at the mountains like they were the only freedom left in the world, I saw myself. I saw someone who refused to be broken by circumstances, and I wanted that person here on this ranch because I was tired of feeling alone." Thomas felt his breath catch. "Lily." "I know it is complicated," she said quickly. "I know the contract makes everything impossible, but I need you to know that you are not just hired help to me. You are not property or an investment or anything transactional. You are someone I have come to care about deeply, and that terrifies me because I do not know how to navigate it." "I care about you too," Thomas said, the words feeling inadequate for what he actually felt. "More than I probably should, given the situation. But Lily, every day I work beside you, every time I see you fight for this place and these people, I fall a little more in love with the person you are." The words hung in the air between them. Lily stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You love me?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible. "I think I started loving you the day you bid on my contract," Thomas admitted. "When you looked at me like I was a person worth fighting for, that feeling has only grown stronger." Lily took a step closer. In the darkness, Thomas could smell the scent of horses and leather and something floral from her soap. "Thomas, I own your contract. For 5 more years you are legally bound to me. If I tell you I love you too, how do you know it is real? How do you know it is not just gratitude or circumstance or the pressure of this life we are living?" "Because I know you," Thomas said simply. "You could have accepted Sloane's offer and had security. You could have sold my contract today to save the ranch. You chose the harder path every time because that is who you are. If you say you love me, I will believe it." "Then I love you," Lily whispered. "I love your courage and your kindness and the way you stood up to Garrett's men even though you were scared. I love that you offered to let me sell your contract to save the ranch, even knowing what that would cost you. I love you, Thomas Owens, and it is the most inconvenient feeling I have ever experienced." Thomas laughed at that, a sound of pure joy. "We do have terrible timing." "The worst," Lily agreed, but she was smiling too. "So what do we do?" Thomas asked. "I do not know, but I think we start by acknowledging that this is real, whatever this is, and we figure out the rest as we go." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she did not, he took her hand in his. Her fingers were calloused from work and strong, and they intertwined with his like they were made to fit together. "I can live with that," he said. They stood on the porch together, hands clasped, and looked out at the land they were both fighting to preserve. It was not a perfect solution, and the complications of their situation had not disappeared. But for the first time since being sold on that auction block, Thomas felt like he had found something worth more than freedom, worth more than land or money or any material measure of success. He had found home. The weeks that followed were both wonderful and frustrating. Thomas and Lily worked the ranch during the day, maintaining the careful professionalism they had always shown. But in the evenings, they would find excuses to be near each other, checking the horses together, reviewing the ranch accounts, sitting on the porch with coffee. They talked about everything, sharing histories and dreams and fears. And sometimes, when Henry and Samuel had retired and the night wrapped around them like a blanket, they would hold hands and steal kisses that tasted like possibility. But the reality of Thomas's indentured status remained a shadow over everything. He was still bound to Lily by contract, still legally obligated to remain on the ranch regardless of his feelings. They both knew that any formal relationship between them would be questioned and criticized. People would say he was trying to secure his freedom through romance, or that she was taking advantage of someone who had no choice but to please her. "It makes me so angry," Lily said one night, pacing the porch in frustration. "That something as simple as two people falling in love should be so complicated because of a piece of paper." "The paper is there to protect me," Thomas reminded her gently, "to ensure I work off my father's debt as agreed. I know, but it feels like prison now, for both of us." Thomas had been thinking about this a lot. What if we just waited 5 more years until my contract ends? Then there would be no question about my motivations or your ethics. We would both be free to choose. Lily stopped pacing and turned to look at him. 5 years is a long time, Thomas. I know. But I have already lost my father, lost my home, lost almost everything. What I have found here with you is worth waiting for. And if we are going to build a life together, I want it to be on a foundation that nobody can question. She crossed to where he sat and knelt down, taking his hands in hers. "You would really wait 5 years? I would wait 50 if that is what it took." Tears gleamed in her eyes. "What did I do to deserve you? You saw me as a person when I was being sold like livestock," Thomas said. "You gave me back my dignity. That is not something I will ever forget." The investigation into Sloane's fraudulent claim took 6 weeks, but the conclusion was swift and decisive. The land office determined that the debt had indeed been paid in full 3 years prior, and that Sloane had knowingly filed a false claim. He was fined and publicly censured, and his reputation took a significant blow throughout the county. But Sloane did not take the defeat gracefully. 2 weeks after the ruling, He rode to the ranch himself with a group of hired guns. Thomas was in the barn when they arrived, but he heard the commotion and came running with Henry and Samuel close behind. Sloane sat on a black stallion in the center of the yard, a big man gone to fat with small eyes and a cruel mouth. His men spread out around him, hands near their weapons. Lily stood on the porch facing them, her rifle held loosely but ready. "You made me look like a fool," Sloane said without preamble. "You made yourself look like a fool," Lily replied coolly. "I just exposed the truth. This land should be mine. Your father knew it, which is why he was willing to deal. My father paid his debts, and you know it. Now get off my property." Sloane's eyes found Thomas. "Is this the boy you bought at auction? The indentured man? Rumors around town say you two are more than employer and employee." Thomas felt his hands curl into fists, but Lily spoke before he could. "My personal life is none of your concern." "It is when it involves questionable morality," Sloane said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Taking advantage of someone bound to you by contract, someone who cannot refuse you. People might wonder about that." "The only person here with questionable morality is you," Thomas said, stepping forward. "Coming onto someone's land with armed men to make threats because you lost a legal case." Sloane's face darkened. "Boy, you want to watch how you talk to me." "I am not a boy." "And you are the one who needs to watch yourself. We have witnesses to this conversation. Anything happens to this ranch or these people, everyone will know who to blame." For a tense moment, Thomas thought Sloane might order his men to attack. But then Henry and Samuel stepped up beside Thomas, both armed, and the odds suddenly did not look as favorable. Sloane was a bully, but he was not stupid. "This is not over," Sloane said, wheeling his horse around. "You cannot hold this land forever, little girl. Eventually you will slip up, and when you do, I will be there." They rode off in a cloud of dust. Lily lowered her rifle slowly, and Thomas saw that her hands were shaking. "He is right," she said quietly. "He is going to keep coming at us." "Then we keep standing our ground," Thomas said. "Together." She looked at him, and despite the fear and anger, she smiled. "Together." The seasons turned. Summer faded into fall and fall into winter. The ranch work continued, hard and unrelenting, but Thomas had never been happier. He and Lily had settled into a careful dance, maintaining propriety during the day, stealing moments together in the evenings, building a relationship based on deep friendship and shared purpose as much as romantic love. They never spoke publicly about their feelings, but Henry and Samuel were not blind. One evening, Samuel pulled Thomas aside in the barn. "You love her," the older man said. It was not a question. Thomas considered denying it, then decided there was no point. "Yes," Samuel nodded slowly. "She loves you too, been obvious for months to anyone with eyes. The contract makes it complicated. Life makes everything complicated, son. The question is whether you are willing to do right by her." "I would die for her," Thomas said simply. "Dying is easy. Living right is harder." Samuel fixed him with a penetrating look. "Your contract ends in a few years. What happens then? Then I am free to ask her to marry me if she will have me. And until then, we wait, we work, we build something worth having." Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. "Good man. Your father would be proud." The words caught Thomas unexpectedly, bringing tears to his eyes. He had thought about his father often over the past year, wondering what the old man would think of how his death had led to his son being sold at auction. But maybe, Thomas thought, maybe his father would be proud that Thomas had turned that experience into something good, had found love and purpose in the ashes of loss. Spring came again, bringing new calves and the endless work of branding and fencing. The ranch was doing better financially, thanks to careful management and a good price for their cattle. Lily was able to hire an additional hand, a young man named Peter who was eager and hardworking. The extra help made the workload more manageable and allowed them to expand their herd. Thomas was now 20 years old, and 2 years of ranch work had transformed his body into lean muscle and weathered endurance. He could rope and ride as well as any cowhand in the county, and Lily trusted him with increasingly important responsibilities. More than once, she had told him that when his contract ended, she wanted him to stay on as her foreman. They never discussed the other possibility that when his contract ended, their relationship might evolve into something more permanent than employment. But Thomas thought about it constantly. He thought about marrying Lily, about building a life together on this land they both loved. He thought about children someday, about teaching them to ride and respect the land the way Lily's father had taught her. He thought about growing old beside her, facing whatever challenges came their way as partners. First, though, he had to finish his term. The 4th year brought drought. By July, the springs that usually fed the valley were reduced to trickles, and the grass turned brown and brittle. Lily made the difficult decision to sell off a quarter of the herd before they ran out of feed and water entirely. It was a financial blow, but the alternative was watching the cattle starve. Sloan, of course, tried to take advantage. He made another offer on the ranch, this time framing it as a mercy. "You cannot sustain this operation in drought conditions," he told Lily when he rode up one day. "Sell now while you still can get something for it." "The answer is still no," Lily said. "You are being stubborn and foolish. That boy you are so attached to, he will leave the minute his contract ends. Then where will you be?" Thomas had been standing nearby, and he stepped forward now. "I am not going anywhere." Sloane's eyes narrowed. "Big promises from an indentured man. Not a promise. A fact." After Sloane left, Lily turned to Thomas. "You should not provoke him. He does not get to make assumptions about my intentions. Thomas, you do not owe anyone explanations about what you will do when your contract ends, not even me." He caught her hand, pulling her close despite the risk of being seen. "Yes, I do. You more than anyone. So let me be clear, when my contract ends in 3 years, I am staying. I am asking you to marry me, and I am spending the rest of my life helping you run this ranch. That is my intention, Lily Ramsey, and I am stating it now so there is no confusion later." She stared up at him, her eyes wide. "You are proposing to me. I am telling you that I will propose to you in 3 years when I am free to do so without any question of impropriety. Consider it advance notice." Despite the drought and the worry and Sloane's threats, Lily laughed. "You are the most unusual man I have ever met." "Is that a yes?" "Ask me again in 3 years," she said, but her smile was radiant. "Ask me when you are free." "I am already free," Thomas said softly. "In every way that matters, I have been free since the day you bought my contract." They kissed then, long and deep, and Thomas felt the truth of his words settle into his bones. The contract had never been about bondage, not really. It had been the path that led him to this woman, to this land, to this life. He had been sold for coin, but he had become rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. The drought broke in August with storms that rolled down from the mountains and turned the dry valley green again. The ranch survived, diminished but intact. Sloane made no more direct attempts to acquire the property, though they heard rumors he was buying up other ranches in the county, tightening his control over water and grazing land. "Let him," Lily said when Thomas expressed concern. "We know what we have here, and we are not giving it up." The 5th year passed in a blur of work and waiting. Thomas was now 21, and the end of his contract loomed on the horizon like a promised land. He and Lily had become expert at maintaining their public face, employer and employee, rancher and hired hand. But everyone in Fort Davis knew the truth by now. They had seen Thomas and Lily working side by side for 5 years, had observed the unspoken bond between them, had watched Thomas turn down opportunities to leave even when offers came his way. Henry joked that their wedding was the worst-kept secret in West Texas. 3 months before his contract ended, Thomas began building a house. He worked on it during his limited free time, hauling timber from the foothills and cutting each board with meticulous care. It was a modest structure, 2 rooms with a loft, situated on a rise overlooking the valley. Lily came to watch sometimes, sitting on a rock and offering suggestions while he worked. "Why are you building this?" she asked one day. "There is plenty of room in the main house." Thomas looked at her, hammer in hand. "Because when I ask you to marry me, I want to have something of my own to offer. Not just myself, but a home I built with my own hands, something that is mine to give you." Her eyes grew bright with tears. "Thomas, you do not have to prove anything to me, I know, but I want to do this." "Let me do this." 2 months before the contract ended, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. A fire broke out in the main barn, sparked by a lantern that fell when one of the horses kicked the wall. Thomas was first to see the flames and raised the alarm, and all of them fought desperately to save the structure and the animals inside. They managed to get the horses out, but the barn burned to the ground, taking with it a season's worth of hay and most of their equipment. Standing in the ashes the next morning, Lily looked defeated in a way Thomas had never seen. "I do not know if we can recover from this," she said quietly. "The hay alone will cost more than we have, and we need the barn rebuilt before winter or the animals will freeze." "We will figure it out," Thomas said, but even he was struggling to see a solution. That afternoon, something remarkable happened. Riders began arriving at the ranch, neighbors from throughout the county, men and women who had watched Lily fight to hold onto her father's land. They came with wagons full of lumber and hay, with tools and supplies and ready hands. "Heard you had some trouble," said Jim Henderson, who ran a small spread 20 miles north. "Figured you could use some help." More kept coming throughout the day. By evening, there were 30 people camped on the ranch, and when the sun rose the next morning, they set to work. Men framed walls and hammered shingles while women organized supplies and cooked meals. Even some of Sloan's former employees showed up, men who had quit working for him because they were tired of his cruel methods. Thomas worked alongside them, moved by this demonstration of community. He had grown up thinking the West was a harsh place where everyone looked out only for themselves. But this showed him something different, that when people fought for what was right, when they treated others with fairness and respect, that investment came back in unexpected ways. By the end of the week, a new barn stood where the old one had burned. It was not fancy, but it was solid and weatherproof, and the loft was filled with enough hay to see them through the winter. Lily tried to thank everyone, but most waved her off. "Your father helped me when my wife was sick," one man said. "This is paying that forward." "You stood up to Sloan," said another. "That takes courage. We respect that." When everyone had finally left and the ranch was quiet again, Lily sat on the porch with Thomas and wept. "I thought we were alone in this," she said through her tears. "I thought it was just us against the world." "We were never alone," Thomas said, holding her. "We just had to prove we were worth standing with." 1 week before his contract ended, Thomas rode into Fort Davis alone. He had a small amount of money saved from the wages Lily had insisted on paying him despite his indentured status, and he had a specific purpose in mind. At the general store, he found what he was looking for: a simple gold ring, nothing fancy but well-made and lasting. It cost him nearly everything he had saved, but he bought it without hesitation. That evening, he finished the house. It was modest but sturdy, with a fireplace he had built from river stone and windows that looked out over the valley. He stood in the doorway as the sun set, imagining the life he and Lily might build here. On the last day of his contract, Thomas woke before dawn and dressed with care in the one good shirt he owned. He rode to the main house as the sun was painting the sky pink and gold. Lily was already on the porch, dressed in a simple blue dress he had never seen her wear before. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she looked younger and softer than her usual work-hardened appearance. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning." Thomas dismounted and stood before her, suddenly nervous. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, but now that it was here, words seemed inadequate. "Your contract ends today," Lily said. "You are a free man again, I know. You could leave, go anywhere, do anything." "I could," Thomas agreed, "but I already told you what I plan to do." "Tell me again," Lily whispered. "Tell me now, when nothing binds you to me but your own choice." Thomas dropped to one knee, pulling the ring from his pocket. "Lily Ramsey, for 7 years I have worked beside you. I have watched you fight for this land and these people with a courage that humbles me. I have fallen in love with your strength and your stubbornness and your kind heart. I was sold for coin at an auction, but you made me rich in ways that matter, with friendship and purpose and love. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Lily's face, but she was smiling. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Thomas stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her the way he had wanted to for 7 years, without reservation or worry, without the shadow of contracts and obligations. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and laughing. "I have something for you too," Lily said. She handed him a folded paper. Thomas opened it and saw that it was the deed to the land where he had built his house, 5 acres officially transferred into his name. "It is not much," Lily said, "but it is yours, so you have your own stake in this valley, your own claim." Thomas pulled her close again, too moved for words. He had started with nothing, had been sold like property, had worked 7 years in a situation that should have been humiliating. But somehow, through it all, he had found everything he never knew he needed. They were married 3 weeks later in Fort Davis, with Henry and Samuel standing up as witnesses and half the county in attendance. Even the sheriff showed up, grinning as he watched the ceremony. Sloane, notably, was not invited and did not appear. The celebration went late into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Thomas danced with his bride beneath strings of lanterns, and when he looked at her face glowing with happiness, he felt like the richest man in Texas. They spent their wedding night in the house Thomas had built, lying together in the bed he had made with his own hands. Lily traced her fingers over his face in the darkness. "Are you happy?" she whispered. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Thomas said honestly. I spent so long trying to hold onto this ranch alone," Lily said, "fighting for every inch, certain I had to do it all myself. Then you came into my life, and I learned what it means to have a true partner. Someone who sees me not as property or a burden or a problem to solve, but just as myself. Yes, Thomas, I am happy." They built a life together over the years that followed, working the ranch side by side as true partners. Thomas proved to be as good with business decisions as he was with cattle, and together, he and Lily expanded their operation carefully, buying more land when they could afford it, and improving their herd quality year by year. Henry and Samuel stayed on until they were too old to work, and then Thomas and Lily cared for them in their final years, giving back the loyalty they had shown. Peter, the young hand Lily had hired, eventually became foreman and married a girl from town, building his own house on ranch land. 3 years after their marriage, Lily gave birth to their first child, a son they named John after her father. Thomas held his boy in his arms and wept, thinking about his own father and the debt that had led to him being sold at auction. That debt had seemed like a curse at the time, but it had brought him to Lily, to this ranch, to this life. His son would never know that kind of desperation, would grow up with land under his feet and parents who loved him, and a legacy of fairness and hard work. 2 years later came a daughter they named Catherine, fierce and fearless from birth. Then another son, David, quiet and thoughtful. Each child was a blessing, and Thomas and Lily raised them to understand the value of treating people with dignity, of standing up for what was right even when it was hard, of measuring wealth not in dollars but in relationships and purpose and love. Sloane made one final attempt to acquire their land when Thomas was 30 years old. By then, Thomas and Lily owned not just the original ranch but several adjoining properties, controlled significant water rights, and had built a reputation throughout West Texas for fair dealing and quality cattle. Sloane offered an enormous sum, enough that they could have retired comfortably anywhere in the country. They turned him down without discussion. "This is not about money," Lily told Sloane when he came to hear their answer in person. "It never was. This is about home, about legacy, about building something that matters." "You could be rich," Sloane said, shaking his head in disbelief. Thomas looked at his wife, at the ranch they had built together, at his children playing in the yard. "I am already rich," he said, "in every way that truly matters." Sloane left, and they never heard from him again. He died a few years later, wealthy and bitter, with children who fought over his money and land he had accumulated through cruelty and manipulation. When Thomas heard about his death, he felt only a distant sadness for a life lived without understanding what really mattered. As the years passed, Thomas and Lily became fixtures of Fort Davis, respected and loved by their community. They helped struggling ranchers, gave young people opportunities to work and learn, and always stood on the side of fairness and justice. Their children grew strong and capable, learning from their parents the value of hard work and integrity. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Thomas and Lily rode out to a ridge overlooking their valley. They were both graying now, their bodies marked by decades of hard work, but their love had only deepened with time. "You ever think about that day?" Lily asked, settling against his shoulder as they watched the sunset. "The auction. Sometimes," Thomas admitted. "It was the worst moment of my life at the time, but it led me here to you, to all of this. I would not change it even if I could." "I was so scared that day," Lily confessed. "I had just enough money, and I remember thinking that if someone outbid me, I would lose my chance. Not just to get help with the ranch, but to save someone who deserved better." "You did save me," Thomas said, "in more ways than one." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Below them, they could see their ranch, the house where they had raised their children, the barn that had been rebuilt by their community, the land they had fought for and preserved. "We did well," Lily said softly. "Your father would be proud, so would mine." "We did," Thomas agreed, "and we are not done yet." They had many more years together, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Thomas taught his sons and daughters everything he knew about ranching and horses and treating people with respect. Lily showed them her father's old ledgers, explaining how careful stewardship and fair dealing had allowed the ranch to survive when larger operations had failed. When John, their eldest, took over the main operations of the ranch, Thomas and Lily moved into the small house Thomas had built before their marriage. It had been expanded over the years, but the original structure remained a testament to what they had built from almost nothing. They were in their 60s when they sat on the porch one evening, much as they had done 30 years earlier when Thomas was still indentured, and they were just beginning to acknowledge their feelings for each other. "Tell me something," Lily said, taking his hand. "If you could go back and change things, would you? Would you find another way to pay your father's debts so you never had to stand on that auction block?" Thomas thought about it seriously. "The auction was humiliating," he said finally. "It made me feel like I was nothing, like my life had no value beyond what someone would pay for my labor. But it also taught me what I was made of. It showed me who I could become. And most importantly, it brought me to you. So no, I would not change it. Every hard moment, every struggle, it all led here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Lily raised their joined hands and kissed his weathered knuckles. "I love you, Thomas Owens. I loved you when you were an indentured man with nothing but pride and determination. I love you now as my husband and partner and the father of my children, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." "I love you too," Thomas said. "You made me rich, Lily. Not in money, but in all the ways that actually matter. In love and family and purpose and home. I was sold for coin, but I gained the world." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening Texas sky. Around them, the ranch hummed with live cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corrals, the sound of their grandchildren's laughter carrying from the main house. It was a legacy built not on money or land, though they had both, but on something far more valuable, on dignity and fairness and love that had endured every test. Thomas thought about that young man standing on the auction block in Fort Davis, terrified and angry and desperate. He wished he could tell that young man that everything would work out, that the worst day of his life would lead to all his best days. That being sold for coin would make him rich beyond measure in all the ways that truly mattered. But then again, maybe that young man had needed to walk that path himself, to discover through hardship and love and perseverance what kind of man he could become. Maybe that journey, difficult as it was, had been necessary to forge the life he now treasured. As the night deepened and the desert air grew cool, Thomas pulled Lily closer. They had faced everything together: drought and fire, threats and financial struggles, the challenges of raising children and building a legacy. They had started with nothing but determination and found everything worth having. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, as every day did. But tonight, Thomas Owens sat with his wife on the porch of the house he had built, looking out at the land they had fought for and preserved, surrounded by the love of family and community, and knew with absolute certainty that he was the richest man alive. Not because of the acres he owned, or the cattle he raised, or the money in his bank account, but because he had learned the truth that some men spent their whole lives searching for and never found. That real wealth is measured in love freely given and received, in work that has purpose, in a home built on respect and partnership, in legacy that will outlive you because it is rooted in something deeper than material gain. He had been sold for coin at an auction in Fort Davis, Texas, reduced to a monetary value that should have broken his spirit. Instead, through circumstances he never could have predicted, he had become truly rich in the ways that matter, in the ways that last, in the ways that make a life worth living. And sitting there beneath the infinite stars with Lily's hand in his and 40 years of love stretching behind them and more years still to come, Thomas felt gratitude for every step of the journey, even the painful ones. Especially the painful ones. Because they had brought him here, to this moment, to this life, to this woman who had seen him as human when others saw only labor to be purchased. She had given him back his dignity that day at the auction. He had spent every day since then proving he was worthy of that gift. And together, They had built something that money could never buy: a life of meaning, a love that endured, a legacy of fairness and compassion that would ripple forward through generations yet to come. The moon rose over the Davis Mountains, silver and serene, illuminating the valley that had witnessed their entire story. And Thomas Owens, who had once stood on an auction block with nothing but his pride intact, looked at everything he had become and everything they had built together, and smiled. He was home. He was loved. He was rich beyond measure, and that, he knew with certainty, was worth more than all the coin in the world.